The night was supposed to be peaceful. A long day had drained me and all I wanted was to close my eyes and let exhaustion pull me under, but something fell off. A sound, soft, barely noticeable, echoed from downstairs. At first I thought it was the old pipes groaning against the cold, but then footsteps, slow, deliberate, like Simeone trying not to be heard. My heartbeat pounded and my earth house was supposed to be empty. My husband was on a business trip and I had triple checked the locks before bed. But then the refrigerator door creaked. Oh, Penny slipped out of bed, each step light as a whisper. My fingers tightened around the cold metal of the door knob. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Who was in my kitchen? A shadow moved across the dim glow of the fridge light. I held my breath, peering into the kitchen from the hallway. And then I saw him standing there, bare feet against the tiled floor. My neighbor's son, a boy I had known since he was a child, now standing in my kitchen at midnight. And the worst part, turned to me, eyes wide, breath shaky, and whispered, "Please do not tell my dad." The moment hung between us, thick, suffocating. The dim glow from the refrigerator carved sharp angles into his face, casting shadows beneath his wide, nervous eyes. He did not move, and either did I. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge, blending with the pounding of my heart. "Why are you here?" My voice was barely above a whisper, yet it sliced through the silence like a blade. His lips parted, but no words came out, just a shaky breath that sent a tremor through his shoulders. He glanced toward the doorway, the front door, as if calculating whether he could escape it before I stopped him. I took a slow step forward. "I asked you a question." His adamsiple bobbed. I adjusted. His fingers twitched at his sides. His entire body seemed tense, coiled, ready to bolt. Something about the way he looked at me like a trapped animal sent an unsettling chill down my spine. He was scared, but not of me. I knew him, Orion, 19, a quiet kid. Always polite, always the one to help his mother with the groceries, always the on to wave whenever he saw me outside. But now he looked wrecked, like he had seen something he was never supposed to see. I glanced toward the kitchen window. The curtains, barely swaying from a draft night outside, was still untouched. No sign of anyone else. My stomach twisted. Was someone following him? Orion, what's going on? My voice softened, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. He swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. "Please, just don't tell my dad." I felt an ache in my chest. His father, Adam Parker, was not the kind of man you kept secrets from. The thought of him made my skin prickle. A former military man, sharp and disciplined, the kind of person who spoke with measured words and never repeated himself. I had only ever seen him smile a handful of times, and even then it never quite reached his eyes. Orion's shoulder slumped, as if the weight of the moment was crushing him. He looked so small standing in my kitchen in his wrinkled shirt and pajama pants. I should have been angry. This was my home, my space. Beautiful, I could see, was a boy who was barely holding himself together. I exhaled slow. "You need to tell me what's going on." For a second I thought he would. His lips parted, but then his phone buzzed. He flinched, his entire body jerked like he had been burned. He pulled the phone from his pocket with shaking hands, his eyes darting across the screen. The blood rained from his face. "Orion," he stuffed it, phone back in his pocket, backing toward the kitchen door. I have to go." Number Y stepped in front of him, blocking his path. His breathing turned dragged, his pupils dilating. "Panic is pure panic. Tell me what's happening." Who waste had he shook his head furiously. "I can't, you don't understand." He'll heal. Something sharp twisted in my gut. I reached out, just a small gesture, just to let him know I was here. But the second me fingers grazed his wrist, he winced. My breath caught. He pulled his arm back, too late to hide the dark, deep bruise blooming across his skin. A sickening realization swept over me. "Orion, who did that to you?" His gaze darted to the side like he couldn't even look at me anymore. "I need to go." I clenched my jaw. "You are not leaving until you tell me the truth." His lips trembled. He looked at the doorway again, but there was something else in his face now, something breaking. "It's my dad, isn't it?" I said it before I could stop myself, the words barely above a whisper. He exhaled sharply, like I had just punched the air from his lungs. Silence, then a single nod. Me hands curled into fists. Adam Parker. Thought of him hurting his son. Madame stomach churn. I had seen the way Orion flinched when his father raised at his voice, the way he always walked a step behind him, like he was afraid of doing something wrong. But I had told myself it was nothing. I had convinced myself it was none of my business. But this was different. "You're not going back there." His head snapped up. "What? Noel, no, I was here. If he finds out." He'll. A loud bang from outside. We both froze. The sound of a car door slamming, then heavy footsteps on the porch. Orion's breath hitched. He took a step back, nearly knocking over a chair. His eyes were full of terror, and in that moment I knew Adam Parker was here. That door knob rattled, a deep voice low commanding, "Orion, open the door." I reached for Orion's wrist, gripping it tight. His pulse pounded beneath my fingers. There was no way in hell I was letting him go back. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, thick with something unseen yet suffocating. Orion stood frozen, his body tensed, every muscle locked in fear. As door knob rattled again. "Orion," I said, "open the door." Adam Parker's voice carried through the wooden frame, each syllable clipped, firm, unyielding. Orion flinched, his breathing turned erratic, shallow, like he was drowned in a place where no one could hear him scream. I had seconds to make a decision. He glanced at the back door. Unlocked a way out. Butorian. He wasn't moving his fingers. Duginto his palms. His knuckles white as Hester at the door, like it was a monster waiting to devour him whole. I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice. Go out back now. His head shook violently. I finds out I was here. A sudden knock, harder this time. Orion. Something in that made the hairs on my arms rise and moved. Before I could second guess, Meisel fripping Orion's wrist and guiding him toward the back door. His skin was ice cold. This wasn't just fear. This was survival. He knew what would happen if he got caught. I twisted the knob, opened the door just enough for him to slip through. Off moment he stepped outside. He ran. Then I turned back, the front door unlocked, and in stepped Adam Parker, the moment off Betrayal. He stood in the doorway, broad shoulders filling the space, eyes sharp, scanning the room. His presence alone demanded control. I had always known him as the man next door, stern, disciplined, but this was different. He was looking for something or someone. His gaze settled on me. I folded my arms over me chest, keeping my expression neutral. Autumn, a slow nod. I didn't realize you were awake. My heartbeat pounded. Lieutenantly, and keep it simple. I forced a small shrug. I couldn't sleep. His eyes flicked toward the kitchen, scanning the space with the precision of a man trained to find inconsistencies. He was searching for a sign, a trace of Orion. And then his stare landed on the back door. It was still cracked open. My stomach twisted slow. He stepped further into the house. His boots echoed against the floor. Deliberate, measured, strange, he murmured. He could have sworn Orion was in here. Every muscle in my body locked. Why would he be here? I countered, forcing my tonetto. Stay steady. Adam tilted his head slightly. There was something eerie about the silence, like he was calculating very possible answer before speaking. Then his eyes flickered toward the counter. My breath caught. I followed his gaze, a glass of water half full, still sweeting from the cold Orion's. I hadn't noticed it before, but now Adam had his jaw clenched. A quiet moment passed between us, a moment where I could almost hear the shift in his thoughts, the suspicion, the realization, the growing certainty I needed to control this. Before it spiraled, I picked up the glass, casually walked to the sink, and tipped the water down the drain. Nonchalant, unbothered, Butatum's stare didn't waver. Then the shift happened. His expression changed. No anger, not frustration, but something else, amusement. Like he had just uncovered a hidden game and now he was playing along. He started stepping closer. I always wondered if you and my wife ever talked. What the words felt off, like they didn't belong in this moment. I blinked. What do you mean? A small unsettling chuckle left his lips. I mean you two arrowways around each other, always smiling, galways laughing. His eyes narrowed slightly. She ever tells you about the way she used to stay up late at night, how she would sit in the kitchen just like this, waiting for someone to sneak in? A cold wave rushed through me. He wasn't talking about Orion anymore. I opened my mouth to say something to Denny. Whatever accusation was forming in his mind. But then his phone buzzed. Adam pulled it from his pocket. His expression didn't change. I didn't falter. He glanced at the screen and smirked. Then he turned the phone around. A message from his wife. I don't know where he is. I swear, please, just come home. My blood turned to ice. Adam knew. I took a slow step back, a small instinctive movement. But Adam caught it. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. So that's how it is. What was happening? The pieces clicked together in my mind. Not just about Orion, it just about tonight, but something bigger. Infidelity. But not mine, not my husband. His wife had been meeting someone insecret, sneaking out in the middle of the night, the same way Orion had just. Tony and Adam, he knew all along. But tonight he had been chasing the wrong person. Tonight he thought he had caught her in the act, but instead he found meth air between us, turned razor sharp, dangerous. Adam's smirk never faded. Well, muttered, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Isn't that interesting? Zelensky, the kind that clung to the air, thick, suffocating. Adam's smirk sat there like a weapon, sharp, deliberate. He took his time, slip his phone back into his pocket, his movement slow, calculated. He had me cornered, not physically, but in a worse way, mentally. I knew it. He knew it. His wife had been sneaking out, meeting Samin. And now he thought he had found the proof. The problem, I wasn't the proof. He had nothing to do with her affair. Butte in his mind, the picture was already painted. I was guilty. And with Orion somewhere out there in the dark, running for his safety. I had no time to waste fixing Adam Parker's twisted assumptions. I had to control the situation now. I folded my arms over my chest, masking the unease crawling up my spine. You should go home, Adam. His smirk didn't fade. That eager to get rid of Memi jaw tightened. Its laid. His eyes dragged over my face, slow searching. Then without breaking eye contact, he stepped further inside. Everything in me tensed. He wasn't leaving. He was settling in. My fingers curled into my palms. I needed him out of my house. Butatum. Adam was enjoying this. He wandered toward the kitchen counter, dragging his fingers across its surface like he had every right to be there. His boots echoed against the tile, each step slow, deliberate. Then he picked up a knife, just a small one, a paring knife from wooden block. But in his hands it looked dangerous. He rolled it between his fingers, testing few weight. I didn't move. I kept my breathing steady, my expression unreadable. I refused to give him the reaction. He was looking for a chuckle, left his lips. You were nervous. I met his gaze. I just think it's strange that my neighbor is standing in my kitchen at midnight holding a knife. His lips twitched just slightly, not quite a smile, not quite a threaten, just as casually. He set the knife down, a test he had been watching, waiting to see if I would flinch. I didn't, but Miss DeMock was twisting into knots because something told me this wasn't just about this wife's betrayal. Something deeper, something darker was brewing beneath Adam Parker's surface. And I was standing right in front of it. Adam exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. You know, I never really liked you there. It was his voice was smooth, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Something had been festering in him for a long time. This wasn't about tonight. This wasn't Evan about his wife. This was about power. He kept my stance firm. I don't care. Adam let out a dry laugh. Yeah, that's thieving, isn't it? His fingers drummed against the counter. A slow rhythm, a countdown to something I didn't want to reach. I needed out of this conversation. He turned toward the back door, reaching for the knob. Go home, but before I could pull it open. You think I don't know what's going on? My fingers stopped. Adam's voice dropped low, sharp. I turned back, my pulse hammering in my throat. High sighs burned into me. Unblinking, gun-renting. You and her number. No, I could see it happening. The way his thoughts were shifting, spiraling, twisting facts into fiction, and his mind wasn't just confronting a lying wife, was confronting the man she had betrayed him with. Mr. I took a slow breath, measuring my words carefully. I don't know what you think is happening, Adam, but shut up. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The weight behind it was enough. I felt it in me bones, the warning, the shift. Adam Parker wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was convinced, and there was nothing more dangerous than a man who believed his delusions. I needed to get out of here. A step toward the hallway, slow, controlled. He mirrored me one step, then another, like a predator matching pace with its prey. Where's Orion? He asked. Miss DeMock twisted. I kept my face neutral. I didn't know. He scoffed. Right, another step. He was running out of time. Orion was still out there. If Adam found him first, God help him, I couldn't let that happen. He had to get him out of my house. But before I could think, a noise, a small one from outside. Adam's head snapped toward the window, and then his expression shifted. His lips curled into something dark. Knowing certain, he turned back to home. He's still here, isn't he? My blood ran cold. He reached into his jacket, and when his hand came out, he was holding a gun. Everything stopped. The room shrank. The air turned razor thin. He had a gun. I had a gun, and now it was aimed at me. I stared at the barrel, unmoving, gun breathing. Adam's grip was steady. Too steady. This wasn't an empty threat. This was a man who had already decided what came next. A deep, calm breath. Tell me where my son is. The world blurred. This wasn't about infidelity anymore. This was about control, power, vengeance. Adam wasn't going to stop, not until he had what he wanted, and right now he wanted blood. I had one shot to get out of the zone. Move 1 second or someone was going to die. The world had shrunk down to one thing, the gun in Adam Parker's hand. My breath barely moved in my lungs. My fingers twitched at my sides. Every nerve in my body screaming for me to run, to fight, to do something. But Adam, he was still calm. Calm, controlled. That was there. All danger. Tell me where he is. His voice didn't shake. I swallowed hard, mind racing. If I gave up Orion, it was over. If I didn't, I was dead. My lips parted, but before I could speak, a sound from outside, a branch snapping. A damn shed snapped toward the window, his grip tightening on the gun. Orion number. No, my chest seized. He was still too close, too exposed. Adam took a step toward the door. I moved without thinking, blocked his path. His gaze flickered over him. Something dark flashing through. High size move. I didn't. A slow, eerie smirk crept onto his face. Brave but stupid. Thegan lifted higher. The barrel was right there, inches from my chest. And then a voice. Dad, stop. My stomach dropped. Orion stood in the doorway, disheveled, out of breath, but standing. Adam didn't turn immediately. His shoulders remained scurred toward me, his stance rigid. But I saw it, the small flicker in his posture, a shift. He had what he wanted. His sawmy throat tightened. Orion, run. Adam's smirk disappeared. You stay right there. His voice was quieter, now sharper. Orion didn't move. His hands trembled at his sides, his breath even, but his eyes got his eyes. He was terrified, and he wasn't looking at the gun. He was looking at his father. Like he had been staring at a nightmare his entire life, like he had been waiting for this moment to come. I had to stop this. I turned back to Adam's voice was steady, now low and controlled. What are you going to do? Adam, shoot me, your son? Is that the plan? His jaw clenched. Orion lied to you, didn't he? Pushed, but you already knew that. You just needed an excuse. The gun wavered for the first immune certainty. I have given him everything. Adam's voice was barely above a whisper, tight, strained. Orion let out a sharp, humorless breath. You gave me fur, that's all. Adam finally turned to him for a second, just a second. I saw it, the realization the moment it hit him. Orion wasn't a boy anymore. He wasn't some Ioneto be controlled to be broken. He had made his choice. And he had chosen to leave. Adam exhaled slow and heavy, then lowered the gun. The breath I had been holding finally escaped my lips. But it wasn't over, not yet. Orion took a slow step forward. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. "You're not going to hurt him," Adam scoffed, but it was weaker. "Now Lessertani never laid a hand on you." Orion tilted his head almost as if he found the word "samizing" right, because bruises don't count when they don't come from fists, right? Adam's nostrils flared. "That's not what you hurt me every single day." Orion's voice cracked. "You made me afraid to come home. Afraid to make a mistake, afraid of you." Adam went still. Orion inhaled sharply. "And now you think pointing a gun at someone is going to fix it? That it's going to make me stay?" Adam's grip on the gun tightened, then loosened. He looked down at his hand like he didn't even recognize it any more than to set the gun on the counter. A long slant stretched between them. The Norian turned, walked toward me, and Adam let him go. The walk to the front door felt surreal. My legs were moving, but my mind was still catching up. It was way severe. Orion stepped outside first, breathing in the cold night air like he had been suffocating for years. I followed and turned back just once. Adam stood motionless in the kitchen, his shins braced on the counter, staring at nothing. The gun remained untouched, the weight of it all pressed against my chest. This wasn't just the end of an argument, this was the end of the life Orion had known. I placed a hand on his hood. "Where do you want to go?" His breath trembled, then he whispered thinly, words that mattered anywhere bother. And just like that we walked into night and never looked back. The night stretched before us, quiet, endless. Each step we took away from that house felt like breaking free from an invisible chain, one that had been wrapped around Orion for years, pulling tighter and tighter until now it was broken. But freedom wasn't as simple as walking away. Hadn't just left behind a house. He had left behind a pasta father, a life built on fear. I stole a glance at him as we walked, the streetlights casting long shadows across his face. He looked hollow, exhausted. But for the first time, he didn't look afraid. He held slowly, his breath curling into the cold air. "I don't know what happens next." His voice was quiet, almost like he was afraid to say it out loud. I nodded. "You don't have to." He swallowed. "I don't even know who I am outside of that house." That was the real weight of it, wasn't it? It wasn't just about leaving. It was about starting over. For so long he had been defined by fear, by the need to survive, and now standing in the middle of an empty street, he was realizing Zerval was all he had ever known, but living was something new. I squeezed his shoulder. You get to figure that out now, and you don't have to do it alone." His eyes flickered toward him, glassy, uncertain, like he wasn't used to kindness without conditions. Then he gave a small, exhausted nod, and for the first time since this all started, he looked like he believed it. The days that followed weren't easy. Orion stayed at a friend's house somewhere his father wouldn't think to look. He was quite distant. Some nights I could tell he barely slept. Years of fear didn't just disappear overnight, but there were moments, small, fragile moments, where he let himself breathe, a smile here, a quiet law there, like he was slowly realizing was safe. His mother called, begged him to come back, but he didn't have an answer, because deep down he knew the truth. She had made her choice, and no, he was making his. Looking back, I keep asking myself what would have happened if it hadn't found him that night. Would Adam have caught him? Would he have been dragged back into that house, forced to keep quiet, forced to endure God knows what? Would he have ever escaped? The thought makes my stomach turn, because the truth is, people like Adam don't stop until someone forces them to. And for years Orion had been trapped, waiting for someone to step in, waiting for someone to say this is normal, this isn't okay. That night, it wasn't about saving him, it was about showing him he deserved to be saved. And sometimes that's all someone needs, a chance, a way out, someone to tell them you don't have to keep running in circles, you can break free. And Orion headed. As for Adam Parker, he never came looking. Maybe he knew Orion was gone for good, maybe deep down he knew he had already lost. And maybe that was the real punishment, not a confrontation, not a fight, but the low, agonizing realization that his control was finally over, because Orion Parker walked away that night, and for the first time in his life was never going back. If this story kept you on edge, hit that like button, comment with your thoughts below. What would you have done in this situation? And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories that will leave you speechless. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, stay safe.